Shavua Tov. Mm.
How are you, Stan?
Good. You hear me? Am I on?
I can hear you.
That's very good. I think Dov is teaching tonight. I think.
Yes, he is. He
Okay.
is.
Okay.
How are you, Elchanan?
Baruch Hashem, Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Shavua tov. So you're not in Florida, Stan?
On a day like today, I wish.
Right? Yeah, I went out for a walk.
And tomorrow morning, another 12-degree morning.
No.
Yeah.
It's going to be a heat wave on Monday, I hear. It's going to be 44 degrees.
Well, that compared to 12, that's
Yeah.
well,
As long as I don't have to shovel it, I'm fine with the weather. Still, the weather has to be shoveled.
those
Cold,
are
rain.
my exact sentiments. If I don't have to shovel snow, I'm fine. Well, and not trip on any ice, heaven forbid.
Right.
Oh yeah.
That's the worst.
The worst, right? Slipping on ice is just horrible.
And Miriam, on Monday, the shiur was Jeff. Is it 7:30 or 6:30?
He didn't say.
Didn't say. Okay.
No, he'll put it in the group,
Okay.
in the
Or in
WhatsApp
chat,
group.
right.
Yeah. I hope it's at 7:30.
Yeah.
An extra hour is nice.
Yes. It's a Moed Katan.
It is. It is. I'm wondering if everybody has off for that.
More and more people. When it first started, it was one of the lesser observed holidays. As a matter of fact, the state of Arizona didn't go along with it as a holiday for a long time, and it took pressure
Really?
from the outside for them to do it. I'm pretty sure it was Arizona. It was one state out there.
So interesting.
And now we got added we didn't take the holiday, but Turo isn't giving us June 19th is a holiday. It's a federal holiday now.
Yeah, they give it to us at CUNY also, but we get also Martin Luther King, so we get both.
Shavua tov.
Shavua tov, Dov.
Shavua tov, Dov.
Shavua tov. Miriam, where do you teach the Daf Yomi? You mentioned the other day.
At our JC.
Yeah, you teach once a week?
Just once a week on Fridays, yeah.
I did not know that. Okay.
I've been doing that since Shavuot.
Oh, very nice. Good for you. Finish the whole cycle then, according to your text.
No. No. This is I knew people would get confused. This is how I started. I started with Megillah by itself, like completely separate from anything. TRM had an initiative like 3 years ago where they wanted like people to try and learn together. So I did Masechet Megillah with my daughter. And then that's when I started doing Daf Yomi. Actually, it's more than 3 years ago. So no, I have a little bit to go, like 4.5 years or something, like 5 years. Yeah, but it's my second time finishing Megillah. So.
Okay. Okay, so we are on 3A at the very top. Let me just get situated here. 1 second. Okay, so we just stated that according to Rava, afilu te'em rabbanan, you can say the Mishnah follows the rabbis that that the Shemitah is a biblical mitzvah, not rabbinic. So why would Tolados not be? Tolados are the subsidiary categories. Why would that not be forbidden? Because avos asa rachmana, Tolados lo asa rachmana. So they would say that when the Torah prohibited work on Shemitah or agricultural work, it only prohibited the av malacha, the category defining malacha, and not the subsidiary ones. Dichsi, what would be the source for this? And the seventh year, this is the mitzvah in the Torah, not to plant, not to grow stuff in the seventh year. In the seventh year, it will be a sabbatical year for the land, and it continues. Sadcha lo tizra, your field you shall not seed. Okay, now what the Gemara is going to comment on here, and it's going to be recur over the next page, is that ordinarily you would say lo tizra sadcha, right? That the object of the sentence would be at the end. Lo tizra sadcha, do not plant your field, do not seed your field. But here the Torah switches the words, so it still means the same thing, but the syntax is a little odd. Sadcha, your field, lo tizra, you should not seed. Now, because of the way that is situated in the pasuk, so the word sadcha, your field, appears adjacent to we'll see the adjacency later, but by changing the syntax, michte, let's see. Zemira bichlal zeria. So pruning is a tolada, is a subsidiary of planting. Ubitzira bichlal kitzira. And picking grapes is a subsidiary of harvesting grain. So why does the Torah specify when it says it continues? It details, it details picking grapes, and why does it pick that out? Like it ordinarily would be, that's a tolada. Like if you tell me don't plant, planting, seeding is the av malacha, so I know that the subsidiary malacha is picking grapes, is also included in that. Why does the Torah go ahead and specify in this, don't plant your field and don't pick your grapes? Picking grapes would be included. Why did the Torah write it specifically? Because what it's telling you is that picking grapes as a tolada is uniquely forbidden, uniquely prohibited. Right? It implies that other toladot of Zriya, which are not mentioned specifically in the Torah, are okay. Right? So the fact that it singles out picking grapes as forbidden during Shemitah implies that picking other things that are toladot of Zriya are permitted. Okay, so that is the source for the rabbis that really toladot are not included in the biblical prohibitions of Shemitah. Okay, so now the Gemara says, "V'lo, really? Is that right?" V'atanya, but we have a brisa. So chalo tizra v'charmachalo tizmar. Using this same verse, your field you shall not seed, and your vineyard you should not prune. Ein liel is riyav zimur, so that only includes those particular activities. Minayin l'niku shel idur kisuach. What about other activities which are toladot of zriyah, like weeding? Like uprooting weeds, hoeing weeds, and cutting weeds. Talmud lomar sadcha lo, karmacha lo. So here we have the again the unusual syntax. Your field you shall not, and your vineyard you shall not. Meaning, what it says is you shall not plant or you shall not harvest, but what the Gemara is interpreting from the odd syntax is lo kol melacha shebesadcha v'lo kol melacha shebekarmacha. Not every kind of work in the field or in the vineyard is forbidden. Minayin shein mekarsmin vein mizardin vein mefaskin beilan. How do I know that you can't trim the branches of the tree or do other things that support the health of the tree. That we get from your field you shall not, and your vineyard you shall not, which means not every not sorry. Not every activity in your field is forbidden. And further activities, how do I know that for the tree you can't fertilize or take away rocks from that are heavily weighing on the roots, or cover the roots that have become exposed, or fumigate it. That's included in the prohibition sadchalo, which is more, you can't do these things with your field. You can't do things with your field. Not only the directly stated prohibition, but other activities as well. And here's another group of them. No, that's it. So so does that also include you can't hoe underneath olive trees to improve the tree, or hoe under grapevines, or fill like depressions under the tree with water, or make ditches around the grapevines to collect water. So here, for these activities, we say, the Torah says, don't plant your field. Planting is included against, like, if the Torah says, don't work your field, right? So I understand planting is part of working the field, right? It's an agricultural activity. Why does the Torah come and specify, don't work your field and don't plant, right? Don't plant seeds. So Zriyah, planting the seeds, would have been in the general rule, but why does the Torah pick it out for specification? Why is it singled out? To tell you, just as planting is a common activity both for grain and for vineyards, right? You have to plant vines, you have to plant grapevines, you have to plant grains, right? So afkol, and so by specifying Zriyah is forbidden for grains and for vineyards, so it's telling you that it's only activities which are equivalent, which are performed both for vineyards and for grain fields, that is what is prohibited. Things that are like Zriyah. So this brisa is telling us that, by the way, okay, so that's fine. We understand that brisa, but by the way, it's telling us that all these other subsidiary activities, like trimming branches and removing stones and fertilizing and so on, all these forbidden activities are prohibited by Sadchalo Tizra. But our original brisa, or what we're trying to ascribe to the rabbis, we're saying that no, it's only av malachas are forbidden, but not toledot, and these are all toledot. So our answer is midrabanan. Okay, so yes, you're right. The Torah only forbade av malachas, the category defining activity, but the rabbis went ahead and included in the prohibition, they included these other toledah activities, the subsidiary activities across machta b'yalma. Yeah, we attach it to the pasuk, the sadchalo tizra, but that is not this is called nasmachta. Nasmachta is where, the rabbis made up a rule and they kind of got support from language in the Torah. It does not mean that technically the Torah forbade this. It's just that the rabbis are forbidding it and they're kind of attaching it to a phrase in the Torah. That's different than saying that the tradition tells us that this is what the Torah means. That would make it a doraisa, a Torah prohibition, but this is still, even though it's supported by a phrase in the Torah, according to the brisa, it's still just a rabbinic prohibition, that they're just supporting their idea with something written in the Torah. Okay, so now we're going to examine some of the things that were in the second brisa. Kish b'shvis, hoeing under an olive tree. is that mishari? Is that permitted during Shemitah? V'haksiv. But it's written Vashvis Tishvatena and Tashta. On the 7th year, you have to leave it fallow and let it be, let the land be. Tishvatena milakashkesh. So this brisa specifically refers to what means leaving it be from hoeing under olive trees, right? From kishkush. That is specifically what the Torah refers to by saying leave the land alone. When the tashta mil sakel. And this other phrase of forsaking, that translates here, leaving it alone, means from clearing the land of rocks in order to support agriculture, right? So this appears that words in the Torah forbid, according to this brisa, specifically these two toledot. Amar Ravukva Barchama, Ravukva answers, oh, you're making a mistake. There's two kinds of hoeing. Right, one is forbidden, one is permitted. One is like to support the to like aerate the soil, remove you're digging to remove too much dirt around the roots, right? And that is something that encourages the growth of the tree. But the other kind is covering up cracks in the roots, which is that is not encouraging their growth, it's preventing their demise. Okay, so to promote the growth of a tree that is prohibited during Shemitah. But to keep it from getting any worse, right? Keep it from deteriorating, that is permitted during Shemitah. Okay, so now that explains why one brisa says it's permitted to dig around the roots of the tree, and the other says it's prohibited because it depends what the purpose is. If it's to promote the growth of the tree, it's forbidden during Shemitah. If it is to prevent the tree from deteriorating, then it's allowed. It was taught, if you are plowing during Shemitah, which is forbidden. One says that this is a prohibition for which you incur the punishment of lashes, and the other says you do not. Why not? Maybe they are arguing about the statement of Rabbi Yavin. Rabbi Yavin said, okay, so here we're getting into hermeneutics of determining what the Torah means. And we have a rule that is klal upratu klal, right? If the Torah says a general rule, and then it specifies an instance of that rule, and then it summarizes with the rule again. So it's telling you, then the rule applies only to things that are like the detail, okay? But you have another rule that is klal uprat, where you have just the rule and the detail. So in that case, what's the rule for klal uprat? Then you follow the detail, if I remember correctly. Okay, so let's see what we have here. What do we have in the Torah about Shemitah? So Rav Avin said, so Rabbi Yavin is saying that when usually the rule is a negative commandment, right? But in the case where the rule is a positive commandment, and then if the detail is a negative, that doesn't follow the rule of rule specific and rule. And we'll see how that applies here in a minute. Mandi Amar Loka Leisley, is it going to spell it out, or do we have to? Do I have to fill it in here? I just filled it in. So the rule is, the positive rule is Bashana Shvit Shabbat Shabbaton Yel Haaretz. In the 7th year, it's a rest year for the fields. That is phrased as a positive, and that's a rule, right? General rule, don't do, or it's a year in which you leave the land fallow. That's a positive commandment. So, and then there's the detail. So more. A negative thing, do not plant your field, do not prune your vineyard, right? And then Shnas Shabbaton Yel Haaretz. Then it sums up with it's a sabbatical year for the land. Okay, so Rabbi Avin is
That's really a positive commandment and not a negative commandment.
Shabbaton is phrased in a positive way, right?
I know,
It's
but everything to do that is not to
the
do.
It's true. Implications are things that you're not allowed to do. But it's actually an important point, I think, because just like the Shabbat of the week, right? Like when the Torah says you should rest on Shabbat, it doesn't only mean don't do this, don't do that. There's also a positive aspect to it, right? It's a rest day, it's a refreshment day, whatever, however you want to characterize it. But there's both the positive aspect to not doing certain activities is included. And I think we understand that well for Shabbat. The same thing can apply to agriculture, right? It's not just you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. Giving the land a chance, the way, one it is, giving the land a chance to regenerate, right?
You say that for every negative commandment, that there's some positive thing that you get at?
So when the Torah states it as a positive commandment, right? So Shabbaton yeh la'aretz, it shall be a sabbatical year for the land. It shall be, right? There's no negative word. There's no word in there, right? So although, as I said, we understand the implications are it's basically things that you're not allowed to do, right? But there is a positive aspect to it too, of resting. In other words, resting is not just an aspect, absence of doing work. It's an actual thing, it's a positive value. Okay, so what Rav Avin is saying is that when you have, this is not considered a klalu pradu klal. This is not considered we don't follow the rule of of the general, then the specific, then the general. We don't follow that rule. So Mandi Amar Lokel Leislade Rabbi Avin Amar Rabbi Elah. So the one of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar that says that you do get lashes, then that's because he doesn't buy this. He's like Katan, he's a little skeptical about this idea, and then so then you would get lashes like a regular. These things are included in the prat, in the detail, right? You would say that if you don't follow the exception, Rabbi Avin, then you would say, oh, here's a detail rule. So anything that's like the detail is forbidden, and you get lashes, right? So that would be why you would get lashes for plowing during Shemitah. And the Uman Diamar Enoloka Islay Rabbi Avin, but the one that says there's no lashes involved, he does agree with Rabbi Avin that we don't go with this hermeneutical rule. So the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Nobody holds like Rabbi Avin. Mandi Amar Loka Shapir. So I understand why you get lashes. Mandi Amar Analoka, why would you not get lashes? Amar Lach Michte. Say, let's see. Zmira Bichlal Zeria. Pruning is included, is like a tolada, is included in the idea of planting. Ubetzira Bichlal Katsira. And picking grapes is like included in the category of harvesting. So why does the Torah specify it, right? Why doesn't the Torah just say, don't plow, or not plow, don't plant and don't harvest? Why does it also include, and don't do it with the grapes either? To tell you that Hane told us to tell you that by pointing out grapes, it's saying that only grapes are implying you're not. So therefore, so that would be the reason not to get lashes for it, not because of Rabbi Avin, nothing to do with it. Below, but the Gemara says, really, is it so that you're not liable for other toladot? Vatanya, we have a brisa. Your field you shall not plant, your vineyard you shall not prune. And the Elazari of Vizimor. So I only know about grain fields and sowing and pruning. What about the toladot of hoeing under olive trees and cutting out weeds. The unusual syntax thing again is referred to in this brisa. Meaning not every work in your field is prohibited, just these. And here's another group of things that are specifically, we understand, are specifically prohibited by the Torah, which are trimming branches or dry branches or extra branches or other things to support the health of the tree. Same thing. We get it from the syntax of don't do things in your field. Any kind of work in your field you can't do. And here's another sample of things you can't do. You also can't fertilize it or take off heavy stones from the roots or fumigate it. So basically there are like three, it's all kind of the same thing. It's unclear why it's split into these three different statements, right? But all of these things are work in the field that the Torah says, don't work in your field, you shall not, meaning don't do anything in your field or anything that promotes agriculture. But there are other things like hoeing under the olive trees, or hoeing under grapevines, or maybe you also can't like fill depressions in the earth under the tree. Maybe you can't fill them with water, or dig ditches around the vines. So for those things, and it's unclear how you distinguish between the two categories, but for this category of things, the Torah says, your field you shall not plant. So that's a general rule. Don't plant, right? So that could apply to everything. So why, so if you have a rule, don't work the field. So that includes, obviously, planting. That's one of the things you do in the field. Why does the Torah specify specifically and don't plant? To tell you, set it up as an example. To tell you, just as planting is something that you do both for grain and for vineyards. Of course, so also the only things that are really forbidden by the Torah are things that apply to both vineyards and grain. So in any case, the point is that there are many activities which are toladot, which are subsidiary activities. We just listed about 9 of them, right? That this brisa says that's included in the things you cannot do because they apply equally to vineyards and to grain fields. But they're toladot. So how can you say the toladot are permitted by the Torah? And here this brisa is saying these toladot are all prohibited. So why is this midrabanan? So you think that this is the Torah telling you, right? And I mentioned before, it's like it's unclear why the same words, the same words can include some activities and exclude other activities. How do you know? So we're saying midrabanan. It's only these things are all determined by the rabbis, established by the rabbis. The fact that they link it to a biblical verse is, like we said before, across machta b'alma. That's just a support, right? But it's not a Torah thing. So that is how you can accept this brisa, the brisa that says all these toladot are forbidden, and even though it connects it to a verse in the Torah, it's still a rabbinic thing. So you can still say that biblically these are permitted, and so there's no lashes, and still they're forbidden because the rabbis forbade. Okay. Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Palestine from Babylonia, Amar, he said, Yochel Yilke al Tosefes, you might think that you get lashes for the extra. We'll see what the extra means in a minute. So just to give you a preview, what the Gemara classically calls Tosefes Shvis, the add-on to Shemitah, to the 7th year, is a time period, right? Before and after. Like, it's not just the calendar year that agricultural activity is forbidden. Under certain circumstances, there's a a period before the beginning of the Shemitah and after the end of the Shemitah that's also forbidden. But Rav Dimi didn't know what this meant yet. Okay, so he's going to propose a different meaning. So he said, this is what I heard in Palestine. Yachal yilkal tosefes. I might think that you get lashes for the extra, right, of Shemitah. But nasi lo talmuda liftura. And then the statement that he heard found a teaching to say that you're off the hook for lashes. Okay, v'lo my Talmud, my Tosefes. I didn't know what they're talking about. I didn't know what the extension means, and I didn't know what the proof was that you don't have to worry about the extension when it comes to lashes. I have no idea what they were talking about. So now we're going to try and parse this out. Rabbi Elazar says, "Oh, I can figure out what this is. Charisha. We're talking about an extension. The extension is plowing." Right? Plowing is not planting and it's not harvesting, right? It's preparing for planting, right? Why do you plow the field? You turn over the earth. So I understand that that promotes the growth of the seed once you've planted it. Once you plant it. So first you plow. So plowing, Rebbe Lazar says, that's an extension, Tosefos. That's the extension of Shemitah, right? B'hachi kamar. And this is how the Brisa teaches that this is not subject to lashes. I would think that maybe you do get lashes because it's klalu pradu klal, right? It's the general rule, and then the specifics of not doing these specific activities. And we've just said those activities are those which are equivalent between grain fields and vineyards. So, and this is how the Brisa turned it around and derived that actually you don't incur lashes. Why? Din Kain, Kohani Prate Lamali. If that's so, then why does the Torah list all these specific things? You only need one detail, right? So the fact that there is more than one detail in the middle means that it's not subject to the rule of klal product klal. And since plowing is not listed in the details, then the Torah is not prohibiting that you don't get lashes. But Rabbi Yochanan says no, that's not what Rav Dimi heard. That wasn't what he was wondering about what he heard. This is what Tosefos means, something completely different. We're talking about the extra period before the beginning of the year that is subject to the rules of Shemitah. That's the Tosefos. This is what the Brisa is saying. I might have thought that that the statement of the Torah that you should rest from plowing and harvesting, which is like an extra statement. It already says to you, don't harvest and don't plant, right? And then it says you should rest from plowing and planting, or from I keep saying plowing, from plowing and planting. So by adding this additional statement, it's telling you that there's it's not just during Shemitah, there's also a period before Shemitah begins that is forbidden. So you would think you would get lashes. And then the Brisa figured out why this is not the case, why you don't get lashes, which we'll see in a minute. But first, let's examine what the Tosefos is. My yamim shel lifnei Rosh Hashanah. So what do you mean the days before Rosh Hashanah? How many days? Is it a week, a month, right? It's not. Well, that we get from this Mishnah. Until when can you plow your field, your orchard, I should say, your orchard, before the Shemitah year begins? As long as the plowing is to benefit the tree, the fruit that's already growing this year. Okay, so it's summertime. Rosh Hashanah is in the fall, as you know. So it's summertime, and you still have fruit on your tree, and you there's nothing wrong with the fruit on this tree. This is the 6th year. Shemitah is not going to start till Rosh Hashanah, right? If you're doing work to promote the health of the fruits that you're going to harvest this year before Rosh Hashanah, of course, that's fine, right? But there comes a point in the summer where it's like, the fruit is grown. The fruit is as healthy as it's going to be. Any plowing that you do is to promote the health of the tree for next year during Shemitah. So that's the point at which you can no longer plow your tree, even during your orchard, even during the Shemitah, even during the pre-Shemitah year.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know this might be outside of any of our expertise, but it doesn't seem like plowing improves orchards at all.
Good question. Again, yes, you're correct. Outside of our expertise, we are going to move on to grain fields, which seems more likely. But I mean, you do, like, if you aerate the soil around certain trees, like I know that we have a tree in our yard. It's not a fruit tree; it's an oak tree. But in order to promote its health, our arborist comes every fall and does something. I don't really know what. They inject stuff into the ground. They turn over the earth a little bit. Maybe they aerate it some more. I really have no clue. As you say, it's outside of my expertise. But there is activity you can do that promotes the health of the tree, and I assume that applies to fruit trees as well.
Yeah, I guess I just wouldn't call that plowing.
Okay, but it seems to me that what they're doing, if they're like aerating the soil, turning over the earth, that's essentially the function of plowing, right?
Okay.
Okay. So Beis Shammai says, as long as what you're doing is for this year's fruit, it's fine. But after that point, it's not fine anymore, even though it's the pre-Shemitah year, but you're doing it for the purpose of the fruits that will grow next year. That is until Shavuos. That's when it is. So they give a specific date. They're more or less saying the same thing, right? Whatever Beis Shammai is saying, it's around Shavuos.
Why don't you ask the arborist what he's doing next time he comes?
Okay. They usually just call me and say, we're coming tomorrow, and then they come, and I wasn't really aware, but I could certainly ask, find out.
Get back to us on that.
Remember. Yeah. But he'll say, oh, you want to know about fruit trees? That's a whole different thing. Right? Okay, so that's the extra period before Shemitah, which is a lot, right? We're going to see in the end that it's really just 30 days, but this Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is like, 4 months before Shemitah, you already start the restrictions. If you have Masai Charshin stay 11 Ershis, what about a grain field? Mishatichla Halecha. When the ground dries up, so you've had the rainy season, the ground is moist. And at some point during the summer, after it's no longer the rainy season, the ground becomes harder, drier. So Kolzman Shebnei Adam Harsh. So when the ground is still moist, it's still beneficial to the grain that's growing this year. But once the ground is dry, then any plowing you do is clearly for the purpose of next year, and that's forbidden. What about vegetables like squash and I think, is it cucumbers? Yeah, squashes and gourds. So that there's no so yeah, that's a measure for when you can no longer plow your field. So when does it become beneficial for the following year to start plowing this year? That is when people stop planting their gourds that are still going to grow this year. So apparently the squashes and gourds, they grow more or less, not immediately, but it's not like an annual crop. You plant them and they grow and you pick them. So as long as you're still planting gourds and you expect to eat them this year, then any plowing you do for a grain field is not consequential. But if you've stopped planting gourds because Shemitah is coming, then it's already forbidden to plow the grain fields. Okay. So Rabbi Shimon says, wait a minute. I might be planting my gourds, in August, and Hanan stopped already in July. So, like, why are you making, the custom in one place might be earlier than other places. Like, you're not making a hard and fast rule. You're making a very kind of rule dependent on whatever the common practice is at the time. That doesn't seem right. Rabbi Shimon says, no, there is a hard and fast rule for a grain field, no more plowing after Pesach, which makes sense because that's when the harvesting starts, right? So once the harvest season starts, any plowing you do is not going to help the grain that's already grown. It must be for the following year. And he agrees that in an orchard it's Shavuos. Okay, V'yamar Shimon ben Pasi, Amar Yeshua ben Levi Mishum Bar Kapara. Shimon says, Rabban Gamliel Beis Dino Nimnu al Shnei Prakim Halalu Ubitlu. So later, on his court, they voted and they decided these periods are too long, right? You're going to give people Shemitah restrictions 4 months before, or 5, even almost 6 months before Shemitah. It's ridiculous. We're going to make it 30 days. Or actually, no, not 30 days. That comes up. That's a different thing. They're like, we're going to do away with this Tosefos altogether. Like, if it's Shemitah, you can't plow. If it's the day before Shemitah, it's still okay. So now this opens a whole procedural question, right? How did Rabban Gamliel do away with the previously established rules made by either, whether it's Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai, but there was something, right? And as we said, they're more or less equivalent. So how could they do away with this Tosefos Shvis that had already been decided earlier? Zera says, the Amar Law Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, some say it's Reish Lakish, Rabban Gamliel, how did Rabban Gamliel and his court do away with the rules established by Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? But not, we have a Mishnah. One court cannot abolish or cancel the rulings made by previous Beis Din, unless it is greater both in wisdom and in the size, the number of people in court. So the assumption is that Rabban Gamliel's court was not greater in wisdom than Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So Hashamim Kashan Chada. So Rabbi Avo, or maybe it was Rabbi Yochanan, that whoever was being questioned was like knocked for a loop, like was dumbfounded for a minute. And then Amalei, he thought about it and he answered, Amor kach it must be that the original establishment of the rule had built into it a cancellation clause. Okay, so it must be that when Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai says, 4 months before Shemitah you have to stop plowing, but part of the rule is that's for us. But if later another court decides that that it's not necessary, we're building that into the rule that they can go ahead. Okay, so if it's built into the rule,
it wasn't written into the rule, it was just understood as such. I mean, that's like
saying that it's explicit, that it must be. Well, he's like, the only way we can answer this question is if there was explicitly a clause in the ruling saying that this isn't a permanent ruling. It's only,
they call it a sunset provision.
Yes, exactly right. Sunset provision. Exactly.
Okay. That's when then the rule automatically expires at a next date. I mean, that's what a sunset provision
is.
Is.
So sunset, that's right. It's like we're saying that if in the future it becomes wise for whatever reason to change this rule, then that's built into the rule, is that it can be abolished or changed.
But how do they know that? How do they know what rules have that and what rules don't have that?
Right. So it's a little, what he seems to be saying is the only way I can answer this question. Right. I mean, clearly
it's okay.
How could this have happened? The only way I can understand how this was allowed was to say that there was a clause built into the original prohibition to allow it. So now we're going to examine a little bit more. Where does this rule come from to begin with? So we understand that it no longer applies, but where did it come from to begin with? Didhuhi. So is it really a prohibition established by Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Right? I mean, they argued about it. Right? What is the exact time period? So it dates at least back to there, but maybe it's earlier. Halach l'Moshe Sinai. I can show you. There's actually an oral tradition from Sinai. Ravasi says, Esther, so he's going to talk about 3 items, which are halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which are an oral tradition dating back to Sinai. The first one is Esther Natios, the laws about plowing a field of 10 young trees. Okay, so this rule is that if you have a field that has that has at least 10 young trees in every base saw, so a certain density of young trees, you can plow. The rule is you can plow right up to before Shemitah. The Tosefes Shvis, the extra period, doesn't apply because you're, without the idea is that the trees they won't make it unless you support them. Okay, they're young saplings. They need extra care. So the rule of extra days or extra time period before Shemitah doesn't apply to them. Well, if that's the rule, that means that there is such a thing as Tosefes Shvis, right? So if it's a halacha l'moshe misinai, but there's an exception to the rule, then the rule must also be halacha l'moshe misinai, right? And by the way, what are the other two things that he says are halacha l'moshe misinai? These are not relevant to our sugya, but they're part of the same brisa. Arava, the Arava ceremony, ritual on Sukkot, that they took these big willow branches and marched around the mizbeach, around the altar. The Nisu Hamayim, and the pouring of water libations on the mizbeach, on the altar on Sukkot, which is not explicitly mentioned in the Torah, but it is also halacha l'moshe misinai. Anyway, the idea, the point is about the 10 tree density thing. If there's an exception that's halacha l'moshe misinai, then clearly there's a rule that's halacha l'moshe misinai, and that rule is the extra time period. So how can you say it only goes back to a rule made up by Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? No, it's a halacha l'moshe misinai, and if that's the case, how could Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Shimon? How could Rabbi Shimon say that? Or how could Rabbi Gamliel have abolished it? Rabbi Yitzchak.
Are these trees within the first 3 years for Orla? What does it mean, young?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the details, but it means the trees that wouldn't make it unless you work them. So during Shemitah, you can't perform this function. But the exception to the rule is that until the last day before Shemitah, you can still support these trees.
It's like the 18 minutes before Shabbos, if it's something like you'd have to do.
Yeah, right. That there's an exception made, that there's no need to observe this extra period for this particular situation. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak answers, Ki gemiri hochasa shloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah. What's the oral tradition? The oral tradition from Moshe, from Sinai, is 30 days. That's the Tosefes Shvis. So that is mandated by the original tradition, right? 30 days. What did Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel do? They said, you know what? We're going to extend that period before. And Rabbi Gamliel comes along and says, never mind, we're not going to extend it anymore. But we're still, Rabbi Gamliel then, according to that, would still be sticking with the original 30-day tradition. Beis Shammai added to the extra period going back to Pesach or Shavuos, and they made a clause in that ruling, but our extra extension doesn't have to be permanent. Somebody else can come along and change it when needed. Okay, so that leaves everybody satisfied. But still, the Gemara is going to question: it's challenging the idea that the 30-day period before Shemitah, is that really a halacha l'moshe misinai? Is that an oral tradition? No, it's more than that. It's a biblical prohibition. We have a Mishnah. The Torah says when talking about Shemitah, you should rest from plowing and harvesting. Rabbi Kiva says, of course, you already know you can't plow and harvest during the seventh year. It says, don't plant your field, don't prune your vineyard. So I know you can't do agriculture. So why does it also say, why does it sum up by saying rest from plowing and harvesting? So it's talking about is the extra period before Shenichnas Shvis. As you come into the seventh year, and also as you leave the seventh year, there's a period of where you still can't harvest anymore because all the growth took place in the seventh year. The Rabbi Shmuel says no. Macharish reshus, avkatzir reshus. Rabbi Yishmael says we're actually not talking about Shemitah. We're talking about the weekly Shabbos, just as what is prohibited on Shabbos, charish reshus. So any plowing on Shabbos, I can't think of any mitzvah in the Torah that requires you to plow. Any plowing you do is of your own volition. It's voluntary, optional. So that is the plowing. So the Torah is saying on Shabbos, no plowing. All right, and then it says also no harvesting. But they're harvesting. There is a type of harvesting which is mandated by the Torah, and that is the harvesting for the Omer offering. Right on the first day of Pesach, there was a whole ceremony. We've seen that they went and they harvested barley, the fresh crop of barley, and they offered some the next day on the altar. Right, so that you can do on Shabbos. In other words, the only kind of forbidden Shabbos activity is one that is not mandated by the Torah, but harvesting for a mitzvah of the Omer that is permitted on Shabbos. So that's what he gets from this passage. Whatever, the point is that it's Rabbi Akiva says that the idea of Tosefes Shvis is written in the Torah, right? It's a straight, it's an open mitzvah in the Torah. It's not an oral tradition, right? It says right there. According to Rabbi Akiva's read, Salchalotis, Rabbi Chalotis more applies to the Tosefes Shvis, right? So it's not an oral tradition; it's a written tradition. Elam Rav Nachman, so not Rabbi Yitzchak, Rav Nachman answers. Ki Gemir Hilchasa lemishrei yalda, Krai lemeser zakena. So Rav Nachman says, okay, so what the Torah is in the written Torah is forbidding is plowing in a regular orchard where you don't have this concern of the young trees needing to be supported. It's the oral tradition that came along and said, yeah, you can't plow in your orchard in the 30 days before Shemitah. That's written in the Torah. But the oral tradition is it's okay to do it for the saplings. Okay, so then it comes out that that's how you explain that the sapling rule is an oral tradition, but the general rule of Tosefes Shvis, of not plowing, is a written in the Torah prohibition. But the Gemara doesn't like that. So, like, if you have this oral tradition, what do you need the Torah? What do you need the written part for? The fact that the oral tradition has an exception to a rule implies that there is a rule. So, what do you need the rule to be written explicitly? So now we're gonna say that the halacha Moshe Sinai is that Rabbi Yishmael says that it's the one who says that it's an oral tradition. Rabbi Akiva, and indeed, Rabbi Akiva says that the Tosefes Shvis is a written prohibition. So if you have to say to set the brisa right that there was an oral tradition, so you would say that's according to Rabbi Yishmael. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's a written tradition, but nonetheless, it still comes out that the 30-day period before Shemitah is either a Torah prohibition or an oral tradition from Moshe, from Sinai, and the extra period that was added on by Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, that was what was abolished by Rav Gamliel, the extra time between Pesach or Shavuos and Rosh Chodesh Elul. Okay, I guess we can. Let's go a little more if we have time. We'll go to the two dots. Finish this section. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan says Rav Gamliel midaraisa batalahu. Rabbi Yochanan says no. What Rav Gamliel what they canceled was the whole thing, the whole idea that was written in the Torah. The Torah says there's Tosefes Shvis, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Gamliel says, you know what? Never mind. We're going to abolish that biblical rule. My Tama, why? How could he do that? Gamar Shabbos Mishabbos Bereishis, because he made an equivalence between the Shabbos, the weekly Shabbos, and the Shemitah Shabbos, the agricultural sabbatical. Just as regarding the regular Shabbos, Friday is okay to do work and Sunday is okay to do work, like before and after Shabbos starts. Afkan for Shemitah, we're going to apply the same rule. So, but that doesn't make sense. Rashi, what? Where do you think this tradition came from? Like you're gonna figure out that the oral tradition must be wrong, right? It doesn't work that way. If you have an oral tradition, official oral tradition, that trumps any kind of literary deduction that you're going to make in the Torah, right? You can't say that this hackish, that this comparing the weekly Shabbos and the sabbatical year overrides the oral tradition. Doesn't work that way. And if you're going to say it's a biblical verse, so it's the same thing. Like, you can't take a mitzvah in the Torah and say, oh, the mitzvah, I found something that will nullify that mitzvah. I found some literary allusion that nullifies it. It doesn't work that way. So we have to have a different explanation. Rabbi Gamliel held, like Rabbi Yishmael, that it's an oral tradition. But what is that tradition? Rabbi Gamliel said, and perhaps he had this as part of the tradition, that this tradition only applies to when the temple is standing. Just like the other thing we mentioned that was in part one of these three oral traditions, the Nisu Chamayim. We don't do a water libation today. Why? Because there's no temple, no altar. So similarly, when the temple is no longer standing, these three things no longer apply. So in other words, the built-in to the oral tradition of Tosefes Shvis is that it only applies when the temple is standing. Now the temple is no longer standing, there's no oral tradition of Tosefes Shvis. There could still be, Hillel and Shammai, Rabbi Gamliel could still establish a 4-month period or 1 month period or whatever, but it doesn't have the standing of an official Mosaic tradition. And we will pick up here tomorrow morning, 7:30 on Sundays, right? 7:30. See you then. Good night and Shabbat Tov, everybody.
Shabbat
Good,
Tov.
Thank you.